What does good mean to you?
Good to me usually comes down to positive, affecting either another person or a situation in a way that is going to protect or empower or progress them.
Welcome to Chasing Good, a circle group podcast with the aim to help us better understand the good that's happening in the world today. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy. Hello and welcome back to Chasing Good. Here with me today, we've got Tanya Meisman. Tanya, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great.
Yeah, well, absolutely, mate. Look, as a brief introduction to Tanya, I would absolutely call Tanya a kind of a multi-social entrepreneur. She's done some pretty incredible things, particularly over the last kind of 3 or 4 years with UNIQ You, but then also with Girl Shaped Flames, and then as through her consultancy Trellis. So really keen to dive into her story, her background, and some understanding there. Tanya, again, thank you for joining us. Can we start by having a bit of a chat around, I guess, what's gotten you into this? And can we kind of early years into now? How have you gotten to here?
Look, it's a great question because in the same way that I've always felt like a really sort of almost like a guest entrepreneur, like I'm not a real entrepreneur because I never had like a business bone in my body growing up. I was always very creative and organized, which I know don't seem to go together, but and communicative and things like that. But I just didn't really ever care about business. So the fact that I've now started my third business shocks me. When I was thinking about what we're going to talk about today, and there's a concept of good and doing good things, I wish I could cast my mind back to, being 5 years old, running around the neighborhood trying to raise money for like sick animals or something. But in all honesty, I now on reflection understand that I was quite self-focused up until I started my first social enterprise about nearly 8 years ago now. And that really came from this sensation of just wanting to live and experience life. And I started off professionally in communication, advertising, marketing. So I was working for big ad agencies, big brands in Sydney and then over in London and the UK. And I was just riding the ride and having loads of fun and using my skills in ways that were fantastic experiences and so on and so forth. And then I moved into film production. I was in senior film teams and producer for nearly 12 years. And again, that was living the dream. Filmmaking was, up until now, the best thing I'd ever done. And I reveled in it, but it was quite self-serving in a way because it was just meeting all of my needs as far as creativity and so on and so forth goes. So I guess this kind of this striking of good, and even now I look back and think I I really it was started off just seeing problems. I was working at Queensland Academies. I was head of brand and comms there across the three campuses down in Brisbane after relocating back from the UK, and I just noticed that we had a real problem with girls' confidence levels. It's a high achieving set of schools. They had to go through testing to get in, and you could see when you met the girls in particular, there was a really dramatic uh, downward spiral in their confidence. And when I researched into the data, it kind of reconfirmed what I knew to be true, which is we've got lots of bad things happening when it comes to girls' self confidence and so on and so forth, as well as parents' inability to be able to support those girls because they don't know what to do in this landscape of social media and technology and so on and so forth. So I guess that was my first niggle where I thought to myself, that's not good. That doesn't seem like a very good thing. And I've been naturally confident. I kind of came out that way, performing and having, lots of confidence. And so I was really perturbed by the idea that girls were feeling like this and the impact that it was very likely going to have on their future lives, the lack of opportunities they were going to pursue, the self talk, all of that kind of negative experience. And I thought, well, that's not good. I don't want that to happen. And then I looked at my skill set and I went, well, I'm pretty good at connecting people. I'm good at running events. I'm good at working with young people and communicating with young people. Um, Maybe there's something I could do about it. And that's where Girl Shaped Flames came from. And then what's been interesting, I was reflecting before we spoke about, you often don't know what you care about until things build and experiences build, and you suddenly go, oh gosh, that's not a good thing. I didn't realize I cared so much about that. And that's kind of where gender equality came from for me, because I've been such a confident person all my life. I was naive to think that I had actually never been affected by gender inequality. And then I found myself connecting girls with these women who are working in all these amazing industries, doing incredible jobs that are all very masculine or typically male dominated, and speaking to them and hearing their stories and experiences and journeys. And I was suddenly like, that's outrageous. How could this be happening? And off I went and created, UNIQ You and then Trellis. So I think my journey to where I've come now with the social enterprise, a not for profit, and now a profit for purpose kind of organizations all under my belt has been one of discovery and discovering what I cared about. And then when I do care about something, it's kind of, try standing between me and whatever it is that I care about to try to fix the problem, because I go at it pretty hard.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. Kudos. That is incredible. So, can
Thanks.
we dive into the three independent businesses? Just so kind of
Mm-hmm.
an executive summary, just what
Yeah.
each of them kind of focus on, and
Mm-hmm.
how they're different, or what problems they're solving.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Girl Shaped Flames, I'm sad to say, is no longer. I did wrap her up earlier this year, namely to make room for UNIQ You and Trellis. But Girl Shaped Flames started out very much at its core, raw, sort of an events company, if you were just going to classify it as something. But what the problem it was trying to solve was helping teenage girls in high school understand about the multitudes of how life can deal you different avenues and blows and so on and so forth, and the resilience and the internal ability and the capacity and the capability we have in order to navigate those and learn who you are along the process, and then come out the other side stronger, go after what you want. So the tagline was always, every girl has a fire in her belly and we are here to fan the flames. And it was connecting girls with extraordinary women, not necessarily at that point in time strictly in male dominated industries. This was any women that I would meet and think, wow, you've got a fantastic story or lesson you could teach teenage girls. I'd love to connect you with them. So we ran events. We started off at Brisbane Powerhouse, and I think over the course of the 7 years, we interacted or supported something like 5,000 or so high school students, girls. We ran camps, did mentoring events and so on and so forth. Um, Towards the end, it wasn't the end, it was the middle of Girl Show Flames, I actually created an industry Ignite partnership program. And that was born out of meeting specifically the women who were working in these male dominated industries. So I had women who were at the fire service, water, technology, aviation, wherever it was. And those women kept saying to me, gosh, these girls are so awesome. I would love to like show them what I do and like where I work and how amazing it is. And simultaneously, the girls, after they'd spent a few hours with these women, would say, gosh, these women are so cool. I'd love to find out what it's like to be a scientist studying to go to NASA or whatever it might be. So the penny dropped, and I was like, I could make that happen. So I created an Industry Ignite partnership program. Over the course of about 18 months, we had 500 students physically go on excursions in Southeast Queensland to about 15 or 16 different organizations, Microsoft, QFES, Urban Utilities, so on and so forth. And that was outstanding. The response from the girls, the educators, the women themselves, the companies, everyone was like, "This is so great! It's so great to start breaking down these barriers and connecting these girls with these opportunities." And then COVID hit, and when you're an events business running face-to-face events, COVID was kind of the death knell. So, I mean, I stuck with it. I took as much as I could of Girl Shaped Flames online. We developed a parenting program, Courageous Parenting, which had about 100 or so parents do that over the course of a couple of years, along with a colleague, Diane Harner. And we kind of tried to keep it alive. Simultaneously, I was taking all of the learnings from that Industry Ignite partnership program, and I was watching all of the secondary schools come online rapidly because they had to be forced into the 21st century thanks to COVID. And we'd had to take a couple of the Industry Ignite events online as well. So AWS and I ran sort of 50 girls for 6 hours in an online event, connecting them with all these Amazon women. And I came away from that and thought, you know what? The key here is that these girls are getting to speak to these women. They're getting to connect with them directly, have their questions answered, personal kind of answers and experiences, not just sitting in a group of 200 grade niners and being talked at for an hour and a half. They're actually getting a personal experience. And I thought that's where I can take them to the 35th floor of something, or I can take them for a fire demonstration. But at the end of the day, if they get to sit and ask a woman a few key questions, that will help them move forward in a journey. That's where UNIQ You came from. So UNIQ You is a career, the not-for-profit that I started during COVID is a career advisory platform that essentially has almost like a catalog of fantastic women who work across 10 different male-dominated industries, as set by the Workplace Gender Equality Agency. And companies that are in those industries partner and support the not-for-profit and subsequently get to nominate women to be on the platform. High school girls in grade 9 to 12 can then go on, look at the catalog, and pick a woman that they want to book a video call with. They can do it with their friend, or they can do it with a small group or a class or even a whole cohort. And they can speak to women that they never would normally have had access to and would barely have even understood those jobs existed or anything. And I think the key thing I'm most proud of with UNIQ You is its accessibility. So originally I'm from Yeppoon, Central Queensland, and the accessibility, we got nothing up there. And if you go anywhere further north, you've got no chance. So now we've got about, I think it's 40 or 50 schools across Queensland and all through the regions who can get on, talk to someone from Boeing or from Urban Utilities or from wherever and get that advice and move forward into really cool, amazing opportunities and pathways. So that's really what UNIQ You does. I'm on the board still. I recently handed over leadership to a brilliant new CEO called Val Ridley, and she is taking things to the absolute next level with that national expansion and so on and so forth. So very, very proud of that. That's something that's very important to me. And then that really just organically led into Trellis. So Trellis Collective is the consultancy slash professional development company that I run now. That is focusing on the next part of the pipeline. We've got to skip over university a little bit. I think UNIQ will move into unis at some point in time. But what I'm really looking at now is the very first 5 years that women come into and work in male dominated landscape. So we're talking construction, manufacturing, agriculture, tech, all those types of industries, mining. Now, those women come in, and statistically, what we're seeing is they will leave not only the job, but usually the industry. Almost over 50% of them will leave in the first 5 years. So, if we're thinking about a pipeline trying to address gender equality, where we want more women representation, more women in management, in C-suite, or, on boards, if we have to get them in at the front end of the pipeline, which is what UNIQ is about, significantly increasing the number of girls who come into that pipeline. And then we need to hold on to them, because if we're losing 50% of them before they even get to middle management, then we've got a huge leak in the pipeline there. In addition to that, it's been very important to me to create support for women who are working in environments that weren't necessarily created with women in mind and are still taking, as we all know with all the statistics, hundreds of years to keep building out that culture that can support young women, in these types of roles. So that's what Trellis focuses on now through professional development, both for the women and for their managers. And the hope is that we can increase not only retention of those young women, but also participation, and have them not holding back in work and not speaking up, which is actually very little to do with them, and it's much more to do with the structures around them and the societal kind of structures that have been put in place. So that's it, I think. That's all I've got.
That's a that's incredible. That's truly incredible. The end to end systematic endeavor is really well thought out as well. Not just and I say that genuinely. When I talk to different founders or executives in not-for-profit areas. I always try and pick apart ideas just to see where it is, but you've really kind of covered that in. What if we're talking kind of those if we're talking the attrition rates and kind of retention rates, those statistics being so high, do we know what the core reasons for that are? Obviously, being in that male-dominated industry would help, but how do we? Yeah, what are the reasons?
Yeah, look, there's a multitude. Unfortunately, we don't have enough good research and data that actually drills down into male dominated versus non-male dominated. So you have to get a little anecdotal. I did my own kind of small amount of research at the end of last year, speaking to 100 different women who work in industry there. But the OECD, that's where those statistics come from. You know, essentially, we've got a really interesting boiling point at the moment where we've got um, already, prior to bringing in any other variables, you've got people who are young and inexperienced, and they're often still figuring their way anyway. You know, they picked some subjects or some uni degree when they came out of high school. They did it. They don't really understand the world of work yet. They studied engineering, so they took a job as an engineer. Now they've landed themselves at some mine site or something like that, and they're looking around going, well, hang on a second, this isn't quite what I thought I was doing. And so sometimes it is a genuine discovery that, whoa, this isn't really what I want to do. I think you add to that they get into a landscape where they are suddenly exposed to a whole bunch of different jobs and job types and job variations, and they can kind of pick and choose and go, oh, actually, that looks way more interesting, or that looks way more interesting. You've also you're at that age where you do want to sometimes just get up and travel. You can go to work for 18 months, 2 years, and you get the travel bug, and like, I'm early 20s and I want to go and just be free for a while. So you do lose people sometimes to that as well. But I would say that, typically from what I see anecdotally, we underestimate and don't take advantage of the skills and ability and potential that we have in young and inexperienced employees, because sometimes they can get written off as, well, they need to be put through their paces and they have to work for a certain amount of years before they're going to be useful to us, and so on and so forth. And so I push quite hard for understanding how eager and determined and willing to learn many of this generation are. When we start adding in some variables, then we have things like we've got Gen Z. And so Gen Z are the generation who have only ever known technology. They are the gig economy type of a landscape. They're used to more of a flat structure. They didn't grow up like we've all grown up with hierarchy. You come into a company and you do your time and you move up the slots. If you think of the people who are managing them, and the people who are managing their managers, we still have that old generation of hierarchical thought. We all grew up where you took steps every 18 months to 2 years up to your next level, and you had visibility on that level, and you earned your stripes, and so on and so forth. Nowadays, we've got a generation who are coming in who are a bit like, I can self-teach, I can go startup, I don't really, for better or for worse, because I think there's pros and cons to that attitude, where they come in and go, well, I'm arriving and I'm ready and I'm knowledgeable and I should be on the same level as that person, or I shouldn't have to wait this period of time in order to move up. So there's a little bit of a generational, everyone getting used to each other and understanding how to manage that and manage those expectations. But both ways, the generation coming in needs to understand that it's not a matter of you come in and you think you know everything and therefore you get escalated quickly. It doesn't quite work like that. And then I think the other thing that we tend to forget, because we're kind of a mixture of on the other side of it, but also, again, the generation who are middle management and above, we all had quite a lot of work life prior to COVID. So when COVID came and it introduced this idea of flexible working and not having to go into an office all the time and, jumping onto Zoom meetings and things, we were all like, hurrah, this is amazing. I don't have to waste all that commute time, and, oh, this is way more efficient and all the rest of it. What we take for granted is learning through proxy and the development of connection and communication skills when we are around other people. So what we have is a generation who've come through university in quite a virtual manner as well, because much of them who are coming into the workforce now were doing uni through COVID, or apprenticeships or whatever it might be. They now come into a landscape where it's limited in their access to their teammates. They're not learning by sitting next to a manager and listening to the manager, have conversations and negotiate with people and deal with conflicts and all the rest of it. So they're not learning through osmosis like we used to have. And also, what I hear back from a lot of the women that I'm working with at Trellis is that they are finding it difficult to develop the communication skills and the connection skills that they're really going to need for the rest of their career if they're jumping on to 45-minute virtual meetings that they get on, they have an agenda, they talk about whatever's required, and they get back off again. You don't have that rapport building, that mucky about, that turning to someone halfway through writing an email and talking about the football or whatever it might be. So I think that we have a litany of challenges that need to be taken into consideration when we look at these young people kind of coming in to those first 5 years. And if you think of all that, and then you slap being a minority in a place, whether that's a cultural minority or a gender minority or whatever it might be, there's a whole nother layer. And then you're in a masculine workplace, which has been designed for men, by men. And then you've got that other layer that you have to be dealing with, and that, whether you belong there or not, whether you're capable or not. Now, it's so strange to have a woman doing that job, and so on and so forth. So, what the question is less about like, why are they going? I think it's more about like, why do they stay? It's so hard. It's so complicated. And that's what I guess I wanted to do with Trellis is I wanted to get to the bottom of what do they need to stay? What is going to help them feel fulfilled and secure and not only from external factors, but also internally in themselves, that they feel that they are contributing, that they are valuable, and that they want to stay and keep going through what sometimes can be quite challenging times. And that's what I work with the companies that Trellis works with, as well as the women themselves.
There's a few environmental factors that kind of come to mind initially when referring to that, and I think kind of firstly, obviously, culture is a big thing, and the kind of the people that you have in your team. Obviously we've got salary and remuneration, and that being kind of adequate and consistent across the board. And then obviously you've got career growth and kind of and prospects too. From a people perspective, though, that would be an interesting conversation talking to hiring managers when you're kind of giving them advice around what they need to do to bring on these people. Like, so what if you were having a conversation to a individual who's working for a big corporate, the environment isn't necessarily good, but they're wanting to, and what you've just described, that is that. But this person is in that, and whether they like it or not, they want to make that change, and they want to try and make it easier for, to attract and retain some of these incredible young women into their business. Are there any kind of simple steps they could take to do that effectively just on their own within their team and environment?
Yes. There's two different pieces though, because there's attraction where you haven't got them yet. And then there's once you've got them, what you can do to help them feel, to stay and everything. I mean, the attraction piece doesn't differ too dramatically from what we're used to with most attraction pieces. Is there, exactly as you said, is there good money on the table? Is there career progression? Is there flexibility? Am I going to get opportunities? So on and so forth. From a women perspective, safety is a big aspect. And I don't just mean physical. I mean, do they feel that there are structures and support networks and not just policies, because sometimes policies aren't worth the paper they're written on, actual sort of support and action behind those policies available to them if they are going to go into an industry or an environment that they might feel those challenges by. So I think the attraction piece, from a attraction piece as well, the visibility of other women plays a pretty big part in trying to attract young women into somewhere. If a woman's applying for a job at, say, a massive construction company, and throughout the entire process of researching and meeting people, she hasn't met another woman yet, or maybe she did and it was the woman on the front desk, which is terribly cliched, but unfortunately that is still the landscape we live in at times, that whether she understands it or not, but subliminally that has an impact on her deciding, is this going to be an environment that she wants to work in? If she comes in and she's interviewed by a woman and she meets a couple of women who work there, and she goes onto the website and she sees women represented, and she goes onto LinkedIn and she sees posts about women, whatever, that's the visibility piece that we're always banging on about when it comes to gender equality. So that really helps, because then it's like, okay, great, this is a place where I'm not going to just be kind of the only one. When it comes to the retention piece, once they have actually joined, one part of what we do at Trellis is manager training, and that's for managers who manage early career women. And there's sort of 6 different pillars that I take those managers through. But one of the key pieces, without rehashing all of that, is that it really is about understanding that, without sounding condescending, they need more hand holding than you realize. And if you think about it, they're in your first 5 years, there is so much you don't know. And people who aren't in their first 5 years anymore, you've learnt a bunch of stuff that you've forgotten you didn't know in the first place. So to you, all new information feels like it's easy to cope with, because you're just adding to a bank of already established experience and information. So it doesn't seem like such a big thing. But when you're coming in and you don't have that bank of experience there yet, every new thing and new piece feels big. And so having that understanding that you need to keep in close contact with those people, and I'm talking building an understanding of what they need. And you might start off with like weekly, you go daily, but like weekly check-ins. Let's have a coffee every single week. How are you going? How are you finding it? What are you struggling with? How can I help? And then as they find their feet, you drop it back to fortnightly. Eventually it's monthly, but you just make sure that you're there to say, and that's an open conversation around, what do you feel like you need to understand better? What's stuff that's tripped you up in the last week that you felt a bit nervous to ask about because you didn't want to come across as being inefficient, incapable, or dumb, or silly, or stupid, or whatever? And it's making that safe space, because that's the type of language that comes up all the time when I'm working with these women, is that I don't want to come across as sounding stupid. I don't want to speak out of line. I don't want to have people question. I already feel like I'm in a place of people potentially questioning my authority because I am a woman and I'm here in this male landscape. I don't want to add fuel to the fire by saying something that is a very natural thing to say during the course of a learning and building experience, but it works against me to make it like I don't know what I'm doing. So I'd say to organizations, when you've got early career women working with you, it's building out that, it's just giving them that attention. And especially, if I can add one last caveat, just because they are in a grad program doesn't mean they are looked after. There are some companies, although you can probably count them on 2 hands, that run an extraordinary grad program that has a lot of layers of support in it, and it covers a lot of the stuff that we do at Trellis. But the gross majority don't. They have a grad program that's really just a timetable of when they're going to swap out the departments that they're going to go to. And that doesn't demonstrate additional support, and it doesn't magically put women on even footing with men when they come into a male dominated environment. So that's why I say we have, every time we run our program, there's at least 50% of women participating who are actively in a grad program at the time. And this really is about bolstering and supporting them so that they can then act within their grad program really equally. It was a super long answer for
No, that
a
was a
very short
fantastic
question.
answer. Thank you so much. And I'm gonna take it. I'm gonna wind it back now.
Redirect.
No, we're gonna stay on this, because I think these are some really important topics to cover for people, just to have kind of a bit of overview or context around. You, for Girl Shaped Flames, you mentioned the parent training program. I'd love to understand a little bit more about that and some overarching techniques that you've been able to impart on to parents to kind of build confidence in girls, to help them potentially,
absolutely.
That's all part of the same equation, isn't it, ultimately?
Okay, so yes, so Girl Shaped Flames, a very, very different of mine, Dr. Diane Harner, who is a neuroscientist and a counselor. She and I were swapping notes at the beginning of COVID and talking about how all the great things that I was doing with girls, with all these events and confidence building. But I would have parents hovering around before and after every event, dying to speak to me, to ask me a billion questions about how can they talk to their daughters, and how can they help them, and how can they support them, and all the rest of it. So we kind of sat down and went, you know what, this is a really key piece of the puzzle here, because I can do all of the great things that I can do at an event. It might even be for 3 days at a camp, but I'm eventually sending them back to the environment that they have to exist in every day. And if that environment doesn't have some good approaches to support, and how to broker supportive relationships and communicative relationships, it all kind of ends up back down the drain anyway. So you have to bolster it with, you got to back it up. So we developed Courageous Parenting, specifically to help parents understand what was going on with their daughters. A lot of it was to do with developmentally. So Diane's neuroscience came in there a lot around understanding the teenage years are when the brain goes through arguably its last big leap of development. And so for parents to understand what that meant behaviorally then for their daughters, they could start kind of understanding what was going on with their daughters. Now, what we had to then try to help parents work with is depersonalizing their interactions with their daughters and their experiences, because we're all sensitive human beings, and parents, we're particularly sensitive about how our kids see us or view us or treat us. And so what as parents would misunderstand is that their daughters have so much going on for them psychologically, neurologically, socially, physically, hormonally, that they are genuinely kind of quite disconnected from the world and the people around them, which is a cruel irony because what they need most during their teenage years is connection. And there's this tussle between what's essentially, it's actually known as the identity phase, where they enter into it at about 12 years old or so. You start going into identity phase, and the whole point of that is to distance yourself from people who have held your identity until that point in time. So your parents will like tell you what to wear and what you're eating for dinner and all these types of things. You hit about 12 and you start being like, well, hang on a second, I don't think I want that. I don't want to do that. That continues all the way through to like 12, 18, 20, however long it goes for. And like I said, it's at a time where actually they really need connection, acceptance, a reduction in judgment, but they're actively trying to push everyone away from them. So it's like a horrific, any parent who's going through trying to parent a teenager, generally it's a horrific period of time of parenting. So what we were trying to do is help parents understand the hardware that's going on underneath and the changes that's going on underneath, so that they can reduce the personal responsibility that they were feeling of what their daughters were going through, building their understanding around this idea of confidence and how it's affected during the teenage years, both, hormonally as well as psychologically, and then give them tools and strategies to help them build their own emotional regulation, the parents build their own emotional regulation, so that they can stay really steady while their teenagers are going crazy like this. Because what the teenagers need to know is that they've got a safe place in those parents to come back to. And if they don't feel they have that safe place because the parent is forever like yelling at them or berating them or making judgment calls on whatever the teenager has decided to do, then the teenager starts disassociating that as a safe place. And then when we run into trouble, whether it's bullying or self-harm or worse, they don't feel that they can come to their parents to work through that problem. And we see a lot of, bad psychological things coming off the back of that. So what we really wanted to do was, when we first launched Courageous Parenting, I would talk about building almost like an army of support for teenage girls. And that army was made up of parents. So we needed all the parents who parent teenage girls to understand what's going on with them, to learn how to regulate, to understand how they can communicate with their daughters better, be that safe place, weather the storm of the teenage years. And then that would help their daughter be able to come down from her emotions quicker, know she has a trusted place that she could go to discuss things and work herself through problems, and then come out the other side a little less harrowing of an experience for everyone involved. And then my selfish benefit of it all was to continue this confidence development piece that is really important for girls once they get on the other side of high school, that they emerge not a shell of themselves because they've been beaten to a pulp by all the things I just mentioned, but actually emerge going, whoa, that was a ride, ups, downs, hard, but I know who I am. I've got a great relationship with my parents, and I'm getting ready now to go and face the world on my own. And that was kind of where Creators Parenting came from. Anyway, we loved it. We loved delivering it. It was a brilliant, brilliant program.
Yeah, fantastic. Oh, and it's so important, so important. And I really like the way you kind of had underlay, had the
Underpinned.
underpinned had
There
the
you
underlying
go.
scientific backing to
Mm,
help parents understand the context, because you can't really empathize without understanding, and
absolutely.
that's key, right? Yeah,
Yeah, and
amazing.
not to
Okay.
generalize too much, but for the dads in particular, the dads did much better when they could start off with the hardware,
Mm,
you know, and understand, how the hardware works and everything. And then they could kind of take a step back and start processing more of the emotional stuff and things
yeah.
like that. And so that was a really great inroads into dads. So they didn't just kind of brush it off and be like, you know what, she's all emotional. That's a mum thing. You know how to
Mm,
do that stuff. You go do that stuff. And we found that they were really grateful at having that understanding.
yeah,
Yeah.
fantastic. Now, before you mentioned, your transition into the social enterprise space, and you referenced how you weren't necessarily or typically good until you've kind of found this, and I found it interesting how you referenced your kind of how the action bred kind of
Mm,
the action is what bred the passion for yourself and kind of
yes.
into this space.
Yes.
I've kind of got two questions. I'm going to say them both so I don't forget the second one. But the first
Okay.
one is, can you tell me about kind of that moment of realization for yourself, and what that was like,
Hmm.
understanding what the problem was and kind of the feeling of action around working
Hmm.
towards that, and then B, you mentioned that passion is as it has did evolve through action, but
Hmm.
you've also shifted action now, and you're
Hmm.
kind of working and elevating and
Hmm.
working in different areas. You've zoomed out. You're trying to kind of approach the same problem at different levels. Have you found that
Sorry, the internet's caught again.
purpose?
It seems to relate. Sorry. Can you take me back really quickly to you were saying it just caught for about 10 seconds there.
Yeah, no,
So
that's okay.
the passion shifted the action, but it shifted me away from. Are you sort of saying away from the
Well, it's
original thing around girls and
well, yeah, no,
confidence and all the
I
rest
wouldn't.
of it?
I would just say it's that your passion has evolved. So you've
Yeah.
gone. You've started with actions bred passion, and now your
Hmm.
passion now action has evolved your passion,
Hmm.
or been helped with the evolution of your passion, which has resulted in more action. Have you found that that your passion's changed again now,
Hmm.
and how's that journey treating you?
Okay, I'll try to be succinct. So, um, all right. So I'll do one of the moments of realization pieces. I mean, obviously I would have had three because there was Girl Shape Flames, UNIQ You, and Trellis, but the Girl Shape Flames one, I think I sort of spoke to earlier around it was meeting all these girls and seeing the concerns. Although the funny story, which if anyone has ever listened to any of the other podcast interviews I've ever done, you've probably heard it before, but the story goes that I was actually in a dog park at the time. Like that, I do remember like the moment for Girl Shaped Flames. I was in a dog park with a dog, not just hanging out randomly, and the sun was setting in the gum trees, and I'd had some particularly intense conversations with parents of girls and things over that week. And I just remember thinking I did scouts as a teenager for about 3 years. And it was really forming for me, having that experience of escapism and independence and working as a team and all these types of things. And I remember just thinking, like, gosh, I just want to gather them all up, take them out bush, get some amazing women with them, and like beat confidence into them somehow. Like, remind them how awesome they are, get them away from all the things that are bringing them down and stimulating them, all the rest of it. So Girl Shaped Flames originally was Camp Courage, which I did eventually launch later down the track. That Camp Courage was the first thought around Girl Shaped Flames, and there was this real drive of like I have to help them escape what is killing this kind of self-worth and this confidence and things. I couldn't get Camp Courage off the ground straight away, so we just started off on smaller events. But then I'm proud to say we did actually end up running about 7 Camp Courage camps over 200 and something girls. So that was really amazing. So that was the moment for Girl Shaped Flames. And that was where it was like, I have to do this. I have to fix this problem. This can't happen. UNIQ You, there was another very specific moment as well. So when I was coming up with the idea, I decided this time to do something I didn't do with Girl Shaped Flames, which is actually research before I launched it, which is why I think UNIQ You did come off in a very good way very quickly, was because I did a lot of research. I spoke to a lot of people. And one of the pieces of research I did was a survey I just put on LinkedIn for like 4 days, and I had 107 women working in unique or non-traditional roles fill out this survey. And I was asking them things like, how's your journey been through this type of an industry? Is this what you want to do in high school? But there was one particular question I said, which is, if you had had access to other women who could have told you or given you advice as to what this journey was going to be like, how would that have changed things for you, moving forward if you'd had that in high school? And again, the way I always tell the story is, I grew up in a Rhodesian South African household, so we're all bred pretty stoic. We don't get super emotional about anything. And instead, we just take things at face value. So then what I sat one night and I was reading the 107 responses, and I'm going to pause here to make sure I've still got you because it froze, but I think you're back. Okay, good.
Gotcha. Yep.
I sat down and I read all these 107 responses, and it was like reading 107 15-year-old girls on the page saying, I wouldn't have doubted myself and my decision for so long. I wouldn't have felt so strange and excluded. I would have made decisions that would have taken me in the way I wanted to go faster. I would have not felt so alone. I would have this, I would have that. And like I needed a really strong gin and tonic as I read it, because I was emotionally distressed reading all of this, thinking, this is the journey that all these women have gone on, and it's been hard and it's been emotional and sometimes not rewarding. And I'm just thinking of them, and a lot of people, it would not be a misunderstanding to think that my motivation behind UNIQ You is very much the girls and their opportunities and the pathways that this is opening up for them and what it's going to do for gender equality and all the rest of it. But it was that moment of connecting with those 100 odd women who used to be 15-year-old girls. And to this day, like, that goosebumps me every time I think about them, because I just think that's what UNIQ You for me really started for, was to give them a way to give the support that they never had the opportunity to get themselves, and for the next generation of teenage girls to not have to go through what I just read 107 people went through, and all the thousands of people more. So for me, that was the moment for UNIQ You where I was like, this has to happen, basically. And off I went and made it happen.
I just think it's such a wonderful connection and wonderful action off the back of, there's levels of action that people can take off the back of revelations, but you've done it very well.
Look, I'm also making it sound super streamlined and easy,
absolutely,
but
absolutely. I don't think anyone is under the illusion that business is easy, A, and that impact-driven business is easy, B. So the fact that that you're doing it like you are is incredible.
Thanks.
I'd like to try to now shift into this next, because what you're doing, this purpose-driven activity, the goal of, helping people of all, and particularly the underrepresented groups, is so important. Objectively good. What does good mean to you?
Oh Lord. I think good to me usually comes down to positive, affecting either another person or a structure or a situation in a way that is going to protect or empower or progress them. I think that's probably when I think about good in the context of those of us who are running around trying to run social enterprises and not for profits and things like that. Normally, it's that you want to you want to protect someone or you want to empower someone, and it may not be an individual. It may be a structure or a system or something or other. But you want to, yeah, help break down those barriers and move that thing forward and improve it. But I can't get over that word protection. There's something there about like protecting them from the things that are preventing them from living a life or experiencing a life or having, positive emotions and experiences and feelings.
The word
Yeah.
protection there is interesting because, I mean, I look at, what you're doing as an example there. You're not necessarily protecting. Actually, you're looking to change the systems to which it's in. So that's not necessarily protecting. That's preventing almost.
But well, kind of, but it is protecting in a way because it's, like with the girls in Girl Shaped Flames, helping them develop their confidence and their self worth and their esteem and everything. That's protecting them in a way from what is going to come. It's inevitable. They are going to experience, things like that. And then I think with UNIQ You, yeah, that probably doesn't sit so much in the protection space so much. So I would say that is more about preventative measures. That's more about the positive impact and breaking down the barriers and moving them forward. But Trellis to me still feels protective in a way. It feels as though it's providing a safe space um, to make sure that they can feel protected if they are experiencing stuff that they want to understand how to work through and progress their way through. So yeah, it's an interesting. It was the word that stuck with me when
Yeah.
I started thinking about it.
And interestingly enough, I mean, kind of focusing on the prevention, the protection piece, and this is kind of why I revert back to why I think you've really thought this out and delivered on it so effectively because you know you're encompassing the different elements of progression and friction that's going to come through
Mm-hmm.
that journey um,
Mm-hmm.
at each level, which is really well considered, empathetically considered as well. You've really put yourself in their shoes and you've looked at it from a scientific perspective as well. Do you apply this kind of approach to other situations, other scenarios? This impact design framework that you've applied to this problem. I imagine it you carry it with you in all walks of life, really. Are there other situations you've seen that you've been able to kind of solve in your head?
Create impact, solve it. I think I feel as though it's giving me way more credit than I actually deserve because so much of this feels like it has just been like this evolutionary process of like, okay, now I know more things, I can see more problems, and here's the next thing I would like to go in and try to fix. But that said, I mean, I do find myself then connecting with I like connecting with new people and loads of people, and that kind of feeds me. I'm quite a textbook extrovert in that way. But there's a particular group of women and one particular close contact of mine, Marianne Anderson, who are really looking at how to break down the inequality structures around financing women who are trying to create businesses, startups, social enterprises, do good by providing better access to finance and so on and so forth. So I find myself kind of then drawn to and embroiled in unpacking and helping try to figure out that system and how that's working. And I take no credit in all of the work that they are actually doing on it, but I sit and have sort of conversations with Marianne and the like about those types of things. So I probably do end up coming in and looking at situations and going, well, how could we, how could you structurally kind of change that? I have a bit of a bugbear. This may not be super on topic, but I'll put it out there just in case anyone listening is like, we definitely need to fix that. I'm going to call Tanya and make it happen. But I have a bugbear about the inefficiencies of, I won't say it's social enterprise. ecosystem, but I will say if you take a slither, so girls in STEM, trying to increase the number of girls in STEM as a slither, the ecosystem we have is really inefficient because everyone's running around doing their own thing. And, UNIQ is the same. I was like, we should fix this. I'm going to start my own thing. But we don't have an efficient way, and no one seems to have cracked an efficient way to actually do a macro analysis of all of the money and the efforts and the resources that have been put into these tiny little silos. And how do we actually connect the dots better? How do we redistribute resourcing in a more efficient and effective way? It's not about creating new companies all the time and new social enterprise all the time. It's usually about analyzing what have we already got. And if we pumped a bunch of money into some of the existing entities, UNIQ, but many others, we pumped a bunch of money in. What you would actually do is you would expand out the dots on the map in a way, in the theoretical, ecosystem map, and those dots would start to cross over, and we would have less gaps. Not necessarily they're running around and creating new things to sit in all the gaps, but you'd have less gaps because the companies will be having more impact and a spread impact, and then they can start diversifying what they already do on top of an already established, skilled, execution of what they're already doing. So, I think that that's something that I don't have time to fix right now, but that is something that I really think that we're missing a huge opportunity. Not just, but we've got gender equality of women in STEM, we've got, men's mental health, we've got all these different things where people are running around trying to fix them in little bits. And if there was a way that could all be kind of helped along in a cohesive way, that would be great. And then the other thing I'd like to solve for them in my lifetime is math confidence for girls, because so much of the problem we have with limited girls going into STEM actually does start with mathematics and their low confidence that they have around mathematics and so on and so forth. So, I'm just not done yet. I've got a couple more up my sleeve.
I imagine you'll continue to do so. That's
one at a time.
You've got the bug, mate. How good. You were referencing the impact piece there too, which is fascinating and really, really important to reference, and I agree completely with regards to kind of inflow of capital, but not just capital, resources into the sector. Capital attracts better talent. The better talent we can get, the more complex problems we can solve. But in the same context, the impact piece is interesting because when you kind of balance the impact with traditional finance, and you need to see, so typically they want to get market rate returns in the investment. They also want to get make maximum impact, and you've got to show evidence with that. I was curious to understand a little bit because you're working in such intangible impact measured areas. How are you kind of having those conversations with? I have no doubt in my mind that you get answers of like, tell me about your impact. Can you give me evidence?
Yeah.
How are you doing that? Because it's pretty much impossible to measure.
Look, you can measure it in the moment. What we all want and what we need in order to justify the injection of investment and resource and cash is longitudinal studies, and we need to see that change is happening over time, right? That's the thing that gets very hard to measure. Also because, and it's interesting, so with UNIQ You, for example, we actually measure a bunch of stuff. I worked with University of Queensland to develop pre and post call studies before a girl has a call, the girl, the educator, and the advisor, and then after they've had a call. And that was really to look at markers as far as how did you feel about these things before the call and how do you feel now after the call. So in that way, we are measuring in that moment in time that did we, increase the knowledge, increase your confidence to pursue into that industry, increase your intent to pursue into that industry on a role level and an industry level. And so we are measuring that in that moment, and proud to say that obviously amazing, outstanding statistics of, like 85%, 90% all saying yes, 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 which is great. But at the moment, through the limitations of resourcing, we can't right now then track that girl for the next 5 years and find out, how you spoke to an aeronautical engineer from Boeing that day in grade 9. Did you end up going and studying that and becoming one of them? We don't have, but again, that's a resourcing piece. We really need investment. So usually I believe that you kind of have to get people on the journey with the understanding of the macro problem and the fact that this macro problem needs to be addressed, and where we have to start is somewhere. We understand theoretically that this will work, that the evidence we have in the moment of these things happening is showing us positive impact, and that we can assume that over time that's going to accumulate and result in change. But then we need like someone to dump a bucket of money on us so that we can set up a longitudinal study and find out how that's gone. And the same would be said for Girl Shaped Flames. I used to survey every single thing I ever did. We would run loads of surveys and ask them, did this increase your confidence? Do you feel more or less likely to do whatever? You get it in the moment, but the ability and to track teenagers, you got to get parents involved. You got to do the whole thing. Like it's pretty tricky. So you kind of need some people to come along on the journey with faith that it is impactful and it is working. And then you do need or someone to kind of invest more money in empowering all of these organizations who are out there trying to do good with the money to measure it. Because unfortunately, you look at something like UNIQ You, we don't have loads of money being dumped on us. We have fantastic partners. Some have been with us for like 3 years and have committed to another 3 years, which is amazing. But our focus is on creating the impact. That is where every single dollar is going, to the tech system and to the staff that have to run it. And, that is where the money goes. You don't then siphon off a chunk of money and reduce your impact to then go and try to map out a longitudinal study when you're at the early stages. We're in our first 5 years as a social enterprise. You tend not to kind of go, well, let's reduce our impact by a third so that we can start up a longitudinal study. Later down the track, we might look at it and go, now it's time to start siphoning off, funds into that way. But I think that's the other way that we should be supporting social enterprises and not-for-profits better, is to, instead of turning around and being like, where's your evidence? Where's your longitudinal study? Saying, we think that what you're doing is amazing. We think it's got such potential for great impact. We want to finance or support a longitudinal study with you. And that is how we are going to help you. And I think that becomes mutually beneficial for everyone involved.
Absolutely. I mean, the balance, interesting how you reference that point just then around, impact, as a social enterprise, where do we allocate the money to impact or to operations or to R&D or to, back into the business to potentially grow prospectively, because it's an investment. You don't necessarily know if it's going to, if it's going to have a return. Fascinating. I'm with you, and I empathise with you, because we debate the same things at Circle Group too. But mate, I truly have to take my hat off to you. The way that you're approaching this overarching problem of underrepresented groups in jobs and women being underrepresented and underpaid in the way, and the gender pay gap, and addressing it, very meticulous, well thought, empathetic ways.
I'll take that.
Is really admirable, and your action based approach the whole way through is again fantastic. I consider myself very privileged to get to sit in this chair and to learn from incredible people like yourselves. So, mate,
thank you.
It's an absolute pleasure to have spoken with you today, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for having me. It's jammed just for a second, but I wanted to come back so I can say one final thing.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Okay, cool. There we are. One thing, I want to say it just because you and I were just talking about it before. We were talking about good and, what is good and how do we understand good. And for everyone listening, I've just given Michael another Michael you need to listen to. So the How to Be Perfect is a book that I read in the last kind of 18 months. So I didn't read it. It was an audio book, and I highly recommend it because the author is outstanding. But Michael Schur, Schur, has written a book on how to be perfect. And he basically goes through all of the different philosophers' concepts around good and how we judge ourselves on goodness and how do you measure goodness, and one person's good measures a different way another person's good is. And I just, for someone who has now been in the social enterprise and not-for-profit landscape for nearly a decade, it was such a fascinating read to sit and actually stop and analyze and go, why am I doing some of these things, and why are other people in the sectors doing these things, and what are our motivations, and what should we also be taking into consideration when we run around trying to do all of this good. And it's humorous, it's intelligent, it's really palatable. So massive shout out for How to Be Perfect by Michael Skur.
Thank you so much. And that's such a fantastic reminder about self-reflection and like, but yes, wonderful. Tanya,
cool.
Thank you so much. Thanks so much for listening to Chasing Good, a Circle Group podcast. Our mission is to shift the world closer to kindness, sustainability, awareness, and action. We hope you enjoyed. Until next time.